this organization has served since Ulysses S. Grant was president. Let's talk about it with Laura Childers on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. And as always, you always have a place at our table. And I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter, who is our executive producer, is here. Matthew says even if he eats just a little at McDonald's, he still feels so full of regret. And our producer, Jinx, is in this little glass booth. Speaking of food, Jinx, what's on the menu for today?
Hot liquor. Some people know what that is. It is the juice of black-eyed peas. The nectar of the gods.
Black-eyed peas for what?
Black-eyed peas for Presbyterian good luck.
Okay. We'll check with you next week and see.
You better give it a couple months. God takes his time.
Our video director, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. Though he recently did venture out of that bunker and saw his shadow, so we have 6 more weeks of winter. And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. George enjoys coffee, golf, and the gentle sound of someone donating stocks and other securities to Key Life. And Kathy Wyatt is the soft, feminine side of the program. Kathy never met a pan that she didn't like. We're going to have a great...
Will Rogers, come on.
What?
Somebody else writes these. In fact, Matthew does, and I think he ought to get credit for every one of them.
Did you cook fish in the microwave again?
We got a great guest today, and we got a great program. You know, we deal with everything, abuse and problems in the church and violations of grace and all kinds of sundry subjects that are down and dark, but not today. Today, we're going to hear some stories about lives that were changed, and you're going to be glad you spent the time with us. Laura Childers serves on the communications team at the Bowery Mission, and that's a faith-based nonprofit serving New Yorkers experiencing homelessness. She's a graduate of Covenant College and worked as a magazine editor for 6 years before entering the nonprofit space. Most recently, Laura is the author of a book. I got to find it. Called Lives Transformed, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers. It's a collection of stories gathered from the 150 years since Jerry and Maria McAuley founded their groundbreaking mission on Water Street in New York City, and that was in 1872.
Right.
Laura, you've got to feel like when you work for a mission like that, you better not mess it up, because they're passing along the ball to you at the 1 yard line, and they've been running it for the whole game. How did you get involved in the Bowery Mission?
Well, I had a friend who was working there, and she just said, "Hey, I wanted to take a risk and apply for a job at the mission." I was living and working in Tennessee at the time, and flew up there and met some people, especially James Macklin, who's one of the stories featured in the book. We really hit it off because we're both musicians, and he's a graduate of the mission, came through the program, had experienced homelessness, So they, it was a real fit. They were like, when can you move to New York City? So I moved to New York City and started working for the Bowery Mission. That was almost 6 years ago.
I'm in every city where I've served, there's been a mission like the Bowery Mission. And there's one here in Orlando, the Orlando Mission. There's one in Miami, one in Boston, one on Cape Cod. And I never realized the roots of all of those missions. Tell us a little bit about the story, how it got started, and the difference it made nationally.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So Jerry and Maria McAuley were both Irish immigrants who grew up in New York City, who were in New York City in the 1870s. And they both had somewhat radical conversion stories themselves. Jerry McAuley, he is just this incredible figure of a person. He was a river thief back around that time where there was all the commerce down by the docks of the East River. And he would go and steal at night, sell the loot during the day, and was part of gangs down by the river and very Gangs of New York, if you've ever see that movie.
I'm a Christian.
And then, yeah, obviously. And then he was accused of a crime he didn't commit and was sent to Sing Sing. And he had this experience in prison where he heard the testimony of Orville Gardner, who had been a famous prize fighter. And he started reading the Bible while in prison and then came to faith. And then when he got out, he was also a heavy drinker. And when he got out, he relapsed, into his former way of living several times. But he experienced some really powerful transformative relationships of people who just stuck with him and kept, giving him opportunities and showing him a lot of grace. And he eventually, had this vision for a mission in Lower Manhattan where a lot of people were poor. I mean, you think of like the tenements during the 1870s in New York City, these crowded neighborhoods, gangs, and he and Maria, she has her whole story, it's a whole other story I could go into, but they wanted to create a place where anybody could be welcomed into a community of hope and acceptance in this time where you think of, sort of this time where people, I think of the deserving and the undeserving poor. But they wanted to create a place where people were welcomed into a community of love and transformation. So
I've been reading a lot of stories this morning. It was Mr. McAuley. Did a man ask him to look after his yacht?
Yes.
Even knowing that he was a thief?
Yes. And that story was amazing to me as I was reading through all of these old accounts. And that was a part of the story. There was a very wealthy businessman named Alfred E. Catch. There's actually a beautiful painting of his family in the Met Museum. If you're ever in New York City and you see it, and you see that they're kind of this elite New York family. But he had a special friendship with Jerry McAuley, who was kind of no one at the time. I mean, the poorest of the poor. So he was a mentor to Jerry, and he had a yacht. And even despite knowing Jerry's history as a river thief, he said, okay, I want to employ you. How about you, watch over, be essentially a security guard for my yacht. And Jerry was just shocked by that offer and said, when he offered that, I thought maybe I can be somebody.
Mm-hmm. That is such a good story with overtones of some other stories that are just wonderful. Did when you went to the Bowery Mission, had you ever had these kinds of experiences? I mean, was your dad a drunk and your mom a lady who was thieving?
Absolutely. No, that was not my story. And, it's interesting because I talk to people. Part of my job now is to talk to people about their stories of coming to the Bowery Mission and then their journey since then, the recovery. And sometimes I do get that question, well, who are you? What's your story? And I think, to be perfectly honest, for a while, I felt like, what do I say to that? And then as I've been growing and learning from our own clinical team and going through my own life challenges, and I think there is something where I might not have your same story, but we all know we're human beings and we know what it means to suffer. And we know what it means to mess up, and we know what it means to, I don't know, and so we can have these sort of human connections.
I love that attitude. That's an attitude, and we don't have time in this segment, but Fanny Crosby, Aunt Fanny, was not a thief either.
Yeah.
And look what she did at the Bowery Mission. And we're going to talk about that when we get back. By the way, this is a great book. It's not long. It's not a hard to read book. You can read it in an hour or so, and you'll feel better about the world. We're living in a place where it's very easy to get depressed and wonder if God is doing anything. Well, he is. Get the book, Lives Transformed, and we'll tell you how you can get it a little bit later. But right now, this is very hard work, and we're tired, and so we're going to have some cookies and milk, and then we're coming back. Hey, thanks for joining us. We're talking with Laura Childers. She's on the communications team at the Bowery Mission in New York, and the author and editor of a wonderful book, and you'll use it for your devotions, called Lives Transformed. Kathy?
Laura, during the break, I was mentioning that Fanny Crosby is buried at Mountain Grove Cemetery, which is in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and right around the corner from my grandmother. And the thing that when I was a kid, I went to see that, and it was pretty remarkable to me, even as a kid, that, it's just the most unassuming little marker, and yet a woman that has written somewhere between, what is it, like 5,000 to 9,000 hymns, somewhere around in there, that has so profoundly, affected the world. And yet just down the walkway from her is this monstrosity edifice to P.T. Barnum. And I remember even as a kid thinking, just how incredibly, this was just so weird. The circus is a great thing, but certainly not in comparison. Tell us a little bit about her. A lot of people are familiar with the fact that, that she wrote some hymns, but a lot of people are not familiar with a lot of other things about her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, one thing that fascinates me is just how she committed her life to the rescue mission movement from really 1880. I think she was 60 by that time. So it was, she was older. But the last part of her life, she saw herself primarily, she saw herself first as a rescue mission worker and second as an artist, essentially. And that was her heart. She moved to Lower Manhattan. She was frequenting the missions down there. And a lot of her songs, you notice the themes in the songs being about just coming to the cross in our poverty. Her famous songs, Near the Cross. That's probably one of her most famous. But so the Bowery Mission connection is she would come and, she was known as Aunt Fanny, and she's just this little lady, like she's physically so small and, but very beloved. And she would write a hymn upon the anniversary celebration of the Bowery Mission every year. And a new one, and then attend the celebration and talk and play the hymn. And so just amazing woman. And the fact that she, has this small grave, it's really in line. She wrote all these hymns, but she didn't really always get a ton of credit for them or the rights to them, financial rights to them in her life. Some people think she was actually taken advantage of by her publishers. Anyway, but
interesting.
She was well known, and when she was there, she sat in the audience and mingled with the drunks and the thieves.
Oh yeah.
That's where she was comfortable.
Yeah, that's where she wanted to be. And that, she was beloved by them. And there's this quote that I include in the book that I love from her, where she talks about, don't tell a man of his sins, he knows them already. Tell him of the love that is waiting for him. And I think that really encapsulates her heart and her spirit.
That's good. I didn't know about any of that. Matthew?
Well, Steve touched on this earlier. Every major city has some kind of homeless mission, some kind of outreach like this. And we just take it as kind of a given that, yeah, those are all there. But at a point about 150 years ago, that was not understood as a thing yet. I wondered, did the Bowery Mission kind of end up having a shaping influence on this expansion of this idea of a rescue mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the rescue mission movement at large is really, you can trace all the way back to Jerry and Maria McAuley, and they're considered the founders of the movement at large. And so so their famous mission on Water Street really launched a movement in that, I think it was just 7 years later that the Bowery Mission itself was founded with the McAuleys' support. And then the McAuleys had a newspaper. So the power of media, of course, is part of this. And as a direct result of the McAuleys' influence and the writing, and just the fact of Jerry had this incredibly charismatic personality when he spoke, and he had his own personal testimony. And so as a direct result of McAuleys' influence, I think it was about 100 missions began across the country between the 1870s and the 1890s. And it's amazing because if you look at these rescue missions websites, so many are still operating today, and their stories, their history on their website will say, we trace it back to the McAuleys. So this very humble couple, this very humble mission, I think it started with I don't know, they put up a wooden sign, and then they just sort of let people in the room, and then it launched this movement.
So they were social media pioneers of their age. Good
Influencers of their time.
Yeah.
Their Twitter accounts were actual birds, though.
People all over the country began to hear the stories of changed lives. And, when you see a good thing like that, you want to have something similar. And so people with vision. And I wonder if those mission agencies that are working in the inner city are aware of their roots. I suspect they are.
I think so. I mean, there is the coalition that we're a part of is the Citygate Network. And so, there's the Association of Gospel Rescue Missions. It traces all the way back to those early ages. And so this network has existed and is still together. And then at conferences, the history is spoken of and remembered, because we have to remember who we are to remember, where we're going. And so what's amazing too, I just want to add about so many of these missions that started were people who had a life transforming experience at a mission and then were inspired to begin their own, go somewhere else. And that's still something it's so common today when I talk to people, even now, about their stories. They're just, upon having this amazing experience, they just people just want to give back. They want to help people who are in the same situation that they're in.
You know, one of the things, and maybe we can talk about it later, that was really interesting is the way there's no competition. I mean, the McAuleys supported the mission down the street from them. And in some quarters, that would be a no-no. I mean, I'm doing my thing, you do your thing, but do it somewhere else because I don't need any competition. But they didn't do that. And that's been true of that whole mission movement across the country. Hey, guys, you got to get this book. It'll make you feel better about the world. Lives Transformed. And we'll give you some information later to let you know where you can get that book. And we're talking with Laura Childers, who's a part of the communication team and the writer and the editor of this book of stories that have been. It's amazing what love for the unlovable will do for you and them. Hey, we're glad to have you with us on this etc. edition. We're hanging out with Laura Childers. You can keep up with the organizations she serves at Bowery.org. Laura, give us some contact information. If somebody wants to get this book, you can't buy it at the local grocery store, can you?
No, you cannot. It's a one-of-a-kind edition. So I would say email us at info@bowery.org. Yeah, it's actually not distributed widely, but you can also visit bowery.org/150 years, and it's the companion website for the book.
Give us that one again.
Bowery, www.bowery.org/150 years.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Laura, one of the names that stood out to me that probably would be most familiar, one of the most familiar figures in the book was J.C. Penney, which I'd be interested in hearing about. But just as an aside, I thought one of the really cool bonuses of the book is the artwork. Mm-hmm. And you were saying there's some significance in how that was put together with the book. Talk a little about that.
So thanks for asking about that. That was actually something I was really personally passionate about because working in communications for a homeless services agency, I'm used to seeing a lot of images that are very bleak and dark and kind of have this grunginess or people, reach out to us. They say, can we interview the people that you serve? And typically the creative that we see coming out of that is this like raw, kind of desperation, that the way that the creative choices that people are making. And our goal in this book and in the creative was to have this sort of vibrant, human flourishing, dignity, the way people are created to be originally and then rediscovering. And so we wanted to put images out there that were vibrant and human and powerful. And so we used photographs of the people, and then we worked with the graphic artist to do what looks almost like a painting of each person using that.
Yeah, almost watercolor type of presentation almost.
Yeah.
And J.C. Penney?
Yeah. So J.C. Penney, thanks so much for asking about that. So he himself is not, it's not that he came through the mission himself and was homeless at any point. That's not his story, but he did come to a mission on the Bowery in a great time of need after the loss of his wife. And he had kind of reached the bottom, had fallen out of his life. And he was looking for meaning and completely depressed, and finds himself going down to the Bowery, slipping in the back of a service, and really finding being in a mission a place of healing and being in God's presence. And so that was a very quiet encounter. It wasn't loud. He just kind of slipped in and slipped out, but it was transformative for him. And then years later, when the Depression hit and it's putting a lot of financial pressures on the missions in Lower Manhattan, he comes in as a benefactor and becomes part of the board, and really through his own generosity, personal generosity, kept the Bowery Mission from going under during the Great Depression. And it was because of his, great personal conviction and sense of the importance of the work.
I knew some of his children and liked to listen to stories when they would talk about him. But, I didn't know the connection with the Bowery Mission. That does not surprise me. Some of the men and women that age were strong Christians, and they cared about their communities and their country, and they backed it up with their funds and their expertise. And that doesn't surprise me, but it kind of pleases me that he would slip in the back at the Bowery Mission because he found it as a place of healing.
Yeah. And it was a great, as I understand it, great cost. It was very costly to him. He was successful to a degree as a businessman by the time that he was contributing financially in that way to the mission. But as I understand it, it was not easy for him to do what he did to pull the mission out financially during that time.
Good story. Wow. Matthew.
So, we're closing in on the end of this segment, but I wondered if you could at least start telling us another story from the book, any that just really stick with you, close to your heart.
Yeah. So one I love, his name is Freight Grandy. He came to the mission in the 60s and 70s, and he is the man who is responsible for painting the Bowery Mission doors their iconic red. So that is, now, do I have time to share the story or should we wait?
It's such a good setup. Let's tease it.
Yeah, we call that a teaser in the industry. It means that now you have told us what you're going to do, and it's the promise that you will do it when we return. The name of the book, by the way, is Lives Transformed. Sometimes we forget when we get involved in religion and theology and metaphysics that bottom line, this is not about doctrine, it's about people. And it's about people whose lives are changed forever. And this will do you good, better than medicine, better than drugs if you're depressed. Get a copy of this book, read it, and then get on your knees and say, do it again, do it again. Well, we're going to do it again on the other side of the break. Don't you dare go anywhere. Hey, we're talking to Laura Childers, and she's the editor and the writer of a little book that is life-changing and is titled Lives Transformed. It's about the Bowery Mission. And if you haven't been familiar with this sort of ministry, this is a good way to stick your toe in the swimming pool and begin to see some very important things that God is doing in some very dark places. By the way, you can find out how to get the book by emailing the guys at Bowery Mission, and give us the website again, Laura. I'm old and I forget.
www.bowery.org.
Okay.
Good stuff. Laura, before the break, you were telling us about one of the stories that particularly stood out to you about a guy who was around the mission in the 60s and 70s and kind of left his own kind of mark on the organization. Tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, his name is Frank Grandy. The reason why I like this story is it almost reminds me of Jerry McAuley's story, our founder of the rescue mission movement story, because it's very common to tell these stories of rags to riches, these sort of victory stories. And I love these stories that are about people who just continue to struggle. It's not just one day you wake up and I have the victory. It's I continued to struggle. God continued to find me. I continue to struggle. God continued to find me. So that's why I love Frank Grandy's story. So Frank Grandy was sleeping on the Bowery, 60s and 70s. He had been an alcoholic from the time he was 15. He had tried joining the military, got kicked out, had all kinds of challenges with his family. They just sort of disowned him, essentially. He's in New York City, sleeping on the Bowery. He's come through the Bowery Mission program. I think it was like 10 times or something. And then he would relapse. He would see the neon signs of the liquor store. And he described how they would call to him. He just relapsed again and again and again. And one night he was in the park and he got attacked. He was stabbed by someone in the park and he could only think of one place to go. And it was the mission, because the mission would say, like, we're ready for you. You want to come back, try again, come back, try again. Like, we're always here for you. So he came to the mission's doors bleeding and enrolled in the mission again. He recovered from his injury. And I think, that life and death encounter was part of the thing that was like, oh, I've had this moment of what am I going to do with my life? And he went through the program again. And this time he completed it and had this experience of faith. And, that time he didn't relapse again, but he ended up getting married. He got hired by I think it was an air conditioning company, worked for them for 40 years. Anyway, he is the person who's responsible for painting the Bowery Mission stores, their iconic red. It's kind of all over our branding. And if you come to the mission, even now, we have our red doors and everybody, if you're a New Yorker, you're like, oh, Bowery Mission red doors. And he said, for him, it was like because of this experience of going from death to life, he's bleeding and then he's just sort of associating that with the blood of Christ and then a new beginning for himself.
Such a good story and so true. People don't know this, but the prodigal son went back to the pig farm after the party at home. He just didn't stay as long. It's the prayer of everybody that has tried to walk this, oh Lord of second chances, it's me again. That makes me wonder what happens when somebody wanders into the Bowery Mission? I mean, that's kind of intimidating, isn't it? I mean, kind of explain the way the process works.
Yeah. So we are still a place where it's not like there's a lot of paperwork. I mean, we're a place where our doors are open and you can come in and you can get a meal, no questions asked. We describe at the mission, we call it radical hospitality. That's our value. Getting to know people's names, building friendships, knowing who people are, because people, if you're experiencing homelessness, you're just so used to being a number, and you're used to kind of institutional environments and the experience of kind of being on the outside all the time. And so you can just come and you can show up at 3 p.m. and get in line and just to get a bed for the night and receive all of our services. And then from there, you can, go on to our longer term programs. But the first step is just come on in.
And you all do provide programs of instruction and help and like getting a job and things like that?
Yes, very much. So we're developing a relationship with so many at our front doors, there is an invitation to join our longer term programs. And so we have longer term residential programs that are uptown and they're like they feel like homes, and it's where people can live and receive wraparound services as they're getting back on their feet, support for medical support, counseling, psychiatric care, vocational support, all of that, wraparound services. But something we talk about is, our mentality is like, it's always an invitation. And we talk about John 5, Jesus asking, do you want to get well? And that is what our staff, it's always an invitation for people because personal motivation is so important as part of the process. And so we see everything we do at our front doors that I was describing earlier about hospitality is all of that is part of an invitation of like, do you want something more? Because this could just be a first step if you want more.
That is so good. And the value of the people who have not been valued by our culture has got to be life-changing in itself. And then you add Jesus to the mix and something really exciting is going to happen. And Laura, you tell about that in this book. And we thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing some of these stories.
Thank you. It's such a privilege to be here. You guys are wonderful. So.
Well, we think so too. And our best quality is our humility. Laura, you honor us with your presence. Thank you for being with us. Yeah. Guys, we're going to back out. By the way, the book is Lives Transformed, and you can go to the website, give them an email. They'll tell you how you can get the book. If you make a significant contribution of over $10,000 to the Bowery Mission, they'll give you 3 of them for free. But it's not a very expensive book, and it's called Lives Transformed, and you'll want to read it. Guys, we're going to come back for a little bit and tell you who we're going to do it unto next week. And as always, you will be amazed and pleased at the prowess of the lady who solicits guests for this program. So don't touch the dial, don't touch your computer, stay around, and like Jesus, we'll return. A great hour and an up hour. So don't thank us. We were glad to help. By the way, did you know that you can send a prayer request directly through our Key Life app? Not only that, it puts all of our radio shows, podcasts, videos, blogs, articles right on your phone. You might want to check out that app. John Myers and some others did they worked months on it. And it's an amazing app. Give it a try at keylife.org/app. Sometimes we forget in all of our expert opinions on what makes a difference in people's lives, counseling and medication, long-time therapy. And we forget that lives are changed by other lives. People who have been changed, who have been loved when they know they don't deserve it, who've been forgiven when they fall off the wagon, whatever their wagon is, who've been valued when nobody else would value them. That's the stuff that changes life, and that's dynamite stuff. And that's what the Bowery Mission is about, and a lot of other organizations too. This idea of grace and mercy is a big one. And you know why? Because we all need grace and mercy and forgiveness. And when we get it, that kind of love, we're able to give it to other people. And a place to see where that kind of thing happens and changes lives is in this little book, Lives Transformed. Ought to get it. Make your day. Kathy, who's going to be next week?
Well, the prowess about which you were speaking a few minutes ago is extinct today because I have absolutely no idea who's going to be on the program next week.
No,
So-
it's a surprise.
I think I will
knows?
be. I might be on it.
Who knows? I can't say, but we'll
George,
just
Yeah.
you going to be on it?
Yeah.
Well,
You can tell
why not?
about the hard work of earning your doctorate
yeah.
and what you learned and how that fixes things.
Steve, you
I
could be
forgot it
on.
all.
We could
Yeah,
interview. Steve, we could-
so-
No, we could interview you, and you could tell your BB gun story next week.
and maybe you get another BB gun from
Maybe.
you.
Yes,
You never
indeed.
know. Guys, we're going to be back next week, same time, same place, and it's our fond hope that you'll join us. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't, and that gives you a wide, wide berth.